And we're back, folks, here with another installment of the MCU Rewatch review series with myself and Chris Mueller, the doc from Bleacher Report. Chris, welcome back.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to talking Captain America.
Captain America, the First Avenger. This is one of my favorite movies of the early installments of Phase 1, I guess, of the MCU. Really liked Iron Man. We just got done talking about Thor. We talked about Hulk a while ago. And all very good movies in their own different ways. Captain America, though, is, first of all, one of my first takeaways before we get into anything is that Indiana Jones is one of my favorite movies, and I love the Indiana Jones vibes this movie gives me. And I think that was intentional, but I absolutely love the aspect of this movie.
Oh, yeah. This movie is very much a period piece.
Exactly. And I was going to say, that was one of my first questions. Do you think that this movie does justice by, the World War II period and everything else going on at that point?
We're talking about a heightened version of reality, so they're never going to take something as tragic as World War II and show it on the level of a Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. But I feel like they did a decent job making it palatable for audiences that might be a little younger without necessarily ignoring the atrocities that took place. It's like, yeah, the Holocaust isn't the main focus of the movie, but he is still fighting Nazis, and watching Nazis get beat up is fun.
And that was one of the things that was mentioned, too. So was Red Skull, was Schmidt actually working with Hitler at one point? Then he realized, okay, I don't want to give my weapons to him. I kind of was lost on that.
I think with that, it was sort of like he was using Hitler to get what he wanted.
Okay.
So he never really intended to work under Hitler. He was just sort of doing it until he got more power. And then he was eventually probably going to try and supplant Hitler and become an even bigger crazy dictator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with the weapons they had available, yeah.
Yeah, and Hitler is sort of like a non-entity in this movie, too.
Yeah, no, you don't see him or anything. Yeah, they just reference him, which I thought was interesting. I thought this movie would just take place during World War II, and, okay, from watching the movie, you can kind of tell when it takes place, what's going on, but they actually go out of the way to mention real-life events that were going on at that point, which I thought was interesting, that they were kind of blurring the lines between what was, MCU-related and actual reality.
Well, and again, this is supposed to be taking place in a world that's still our own. So,
yep.
And the fact that Captain America those comics were being made at this time in real life. So, like, there's comic books from the late 30s and early 40s that show Captain America literally punching Hitler in the face.
Do you think...
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
So, World War II is very much... like, it's important to Captain America's history. Mm-hmm. And I feel like taking that storyline from the comics where he got frozen and woken up in the present day was a good idea instead of trying to make him developed now.
Mm-hmm. There is that one line. What I was going to say was that he did say towards the end of the movie, and obviously it was more of a reference to earlier when he was playing, he was on stage doing the stage shows and stuff, and he's like, oh yeah, I've punched Hitler, 200 times. Do you think that was a reference to the comics, or a subtle reference to the comics?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. The whole, gimmicky thing, I don't know if him being used as a propaganda tool before he was a hero is from the comics, but I felt like doing that made the character slightly more human, I guess, because you're watching this guy who's got all these powers basically just being used as a carnival act.
And it's crazy that this is one of my questions. This is why I like doing this, because there's a lot of stuff when I watch these movies that I'm not entirely clear on, because 100% more about this stuff than I do, where he goes out of his way after they give him the super serum and he takes down the agents from Hydra and whatever. And then he kind of transitions into this sideshow act, doing the stage shows and whatever. Did they just see absolutely no value for this guy? Because didn't they give him the serum in the first place to be their next superhero? Or was it because the doctor died, they're like, okay, we don't really have much of a use for him because we don't have the same vision for him as he did?
Yeah, it is a little weird, and I think maybe part of it was at the time they just saw more value in him as a recruitment tool. But it probably wasn't until he like went rogue and proved himself by going out and saving his friend that they really saw him as an asset.
I was surprised that even went through that in the first place, because the whole movie, when we were introduced to Steve Rogers early on, he's looking to get recruited into, the army and whatever, to go to war, and they just won't allow him because he has so many issues. He has a lot of health issues, all this other stuff. And then we don't see it. It's not like he's approached the idea of doing this stuff, but it's a very quick transition from, oh my God, this guy just did all this crazy stuff, running at, X amount of miles an hour on the street, killing these agents and all this other stuff. And then he's doing the stage shows. Do you think they could have done a better job of explaining that transition?
I mean, maybe, but, hindsight's always 20/20. At the time, I felt like the little montage they showed of him doing all the successful missions and stuff was effective enough in showing, like, how useful he had become.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same point, like, when they gave him the serum, he was still an untrained rookie soldier. It's not like they gave it to some guy who already knew everything. So throwing him out into the field right away would have been stupid anyway, because he would have just ended up getting himself killed out of, being ignorant.
Yeah, no, that's true. So in the comics, how familiar were you with Captain America going into this movie? Pretty familiar, it sounds like.
I mean, I'd seen plenty of cartoons and stuff, and I'd watched the old Captain America stuff when I was a kid, because they had made a movie in the 90s. It was like made for TV, and then there was an even older movie from before that. Mm-hmm. And, I'd seen those. They were cheesy and bad, but I knew enough about the character from those to know what he was about. But, like, knowing a lot about it beforehand doesn't really help, because the MCU is changing so much about these characters to where, they're basically just different versions.
Yeah, it seems like they kind of take the base of the characters and then they build on them from there, and they add different characters, they do different things, Do you follow The Walking Dead at all, or no?
I fell off a few years ago. It just got too repetitive.
That's what I've heard from a lot of people. My brother used to watch the show, and he stopped watching a few years ago, too. But correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they the same way, where they kind of take the basis from the comics and they just kind of go off from there, so it's not entirely predictable what they do on the show?
Sure. I mean, they establish certain things as being common. So, the Peggy Carter romance, the way he was given the super serum and turned from a scrawny dude. Like, a lot of his origin is the same, but then they deviate in a lot of small details. And, they have to, because certain things in the comics just don't work on live action.
Was Red Skull a comic book character as well for the Captain America comics?
Oh, yeah, he's one of his, most famous villains.
Did he always have the disguise that he had for most of this movie, or did he always have the Red Skull?
The only pictures I ever saw were with the Red Skull, but I don't know. He may have had a skin mask at some point.
I thought they did a good job of maybe not teasing it. I figured, did you kind of assume going into the movie that Red Skull would be the main bad guy for Captain America?
Well, I mean, the trailers made it pretty clear, I think.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was going to say, even if it wasn't already obvious enough, they did a good job of teasing it when, at the very beginning of the movie, when he killed the old guy to, obtain the Tesseract, he shoots him, the blood, splatters all over his, the badge or whatever. That was the skull. I don't know if it was a Hydra badge or it was just a skull badge. Either way, it was red, and it was like, oh, okay, this dude is Red Skull.
Hydra.
It was Hydra, okay. But yeah, it looked like it was kind of... Do you think that was done intentionally to kind of tease that he was Red Skull, or am I just looking too much into it?
I mean, I think at that point, anyone who just looked up his character's name would have known he was Red Skull, so I don't think they were trying to hide it. But yeah, it was probably a little visual allusion to it.
What were your thoughts on, and we just got done talking about this with Thor and all the CGI in that movie. The CGI in this one, they kind of go above and beyond to make Chris Evans look a lot scrawnier than he actually is. And it's weird now because we know what he actually looks like after seeing him in such good shape for so many years in the MCU. I remember seeing this movie. I don't really think it threw me off too much. when he was, doing the whole scrawny thing and whatever. I know that wasn't him actually. They just kind of photoshopped or CGI'd his face onto someone else's body, blah, blah, blah. Well, before I even get into that, was Chris Evans really known for much before doing the MCU stuff? A lot like, Chris Hemsworth, his breakout role was Thor. Was this the breakout role for Chris Evans?
Well, he was in the other two Fantastic Four movies, so like people knew who he was.
Oh, right, is the fire guy, right?
Yeah, and then he was like my first exposure to him was Not Another Teen Movie.
I don't think I've ever. I may have heard of that. I don't think I've ever seen it though.
It's one of the remember how all those parody movies were getting made for years, like Scary Movie,
like Scream and stuff.
Blah, blah. Not Another Teen Movie was one of the very early ones, and it basically parodied movies like She's All That and Clueless and things like that, like the teen comedies of the time. So you basically had Chris Evans and Paul Walker playing like two just huge douchebag football players at a high school. And Chris Evans plays a great douchebag, so he was really funny in that.
Did you see him in, I assume you saw this, but did you see him in the most recent movie that came out? God, what was it called? Knives Out. Did you see that movie?
Yes, and he was good in that, although I feel like he still looked like more muscular than his character should have.
Yeah, no, that's true. I feel like they probably filmed that.
His character's supposed to be a rich douchebag who's probably never seen the inside of a gym, and here's Chris Evans with biceps that you can see through a freaking wool sweater.
Yeah. That's a good point. I didn't really think about that. Now, yeah, but you're right, though. He plays a great douchebag. So with that being said, do you think he was a good fit for Captain America and being this wholesome, all-American guy?
I mean, I actually doubted the casting at first because I'd only known him as like a cocky character. And I'm like, oh, they're going to make Captain America be all like quippy and sarcastic.
Sure.
But he did a really good job playing like a very humble, earnest guy who's more often the butt of the joke than the one saying the punchline. I felt like they did a really good job treading that line.
He's one of the few, I mean, he's, to kind of pull a wrestling analogy, a wrestling reference here, but he seems like he's the type of actor who can play a very good baby face as well as a very good heel, too, regardless of the role that he's in.
Oh, sure. And what's funny is, like, I don't think a lot of people realize this, but Chris Evans is up there for portraying the most different comic book characters. Because he was in the two Fantastic Four movies.
Yeah.
And then he was also in a movie called Push with, like, I think Dakota Fanning was in it, and that was based on a graphic novel about people with superheroes in the near future. He was in a movie called The Losers with Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Zoe Saldana, which was also based on a comic book. And then he was in Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which was based on a very popular comic book.
Oh, I didn't know he was in that movie. I've never seen it. I know what it is, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, he was one of the 7 boyfriends that Michael Cera has to fight, and he plays like a Hollywood douchebag actor in that movie.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
I've never... Do you know if he's a big comic book guy or something, or is that just a coincidence?
I think it's just that he was, like, it's perfect timing for when those movies were coming out, and his star was on the rise, and I mean, he was... Even though people probably mostly knew him as the sarcastic guy, like, he'd done other things. Like, there's a movie called Sunshine that he was in the 2000s. That's, like, it's a very serious sci-fi movie, and he was very good in it.
Yeah, no, he's been good in everything that I've seen him in. I thought he came across really well here as well. So, having seen him in other stuff before this, what were your thoughts on the CGI that they used for the Steve Rogers body before he was injected with the serum early on in the movie?
I mean, it still looks good. It still holds up to this day, but I think it's easier to do a body than it is a face.
I agree, yeah.
And that's why we still see certain, like, Michael Douglas in the last Avengers movie didn't look great. Like, his de-aging CGI didn't look as good as it did in the first Ant-Man movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, like, and then, of course, there's Rogue One, Star Wars.
Yeah, with Leia, right? Yeah.
Grand Moff.
Oh,
No,
Tarkin.
Grandma
Oh, yeah,
Tarkin.
right. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
Like, that looked like a character from a PlayStation 2 video game. Like, that did not
That
look
was
like a
so
real
obvious.
person.
Yeah, that
And it
looked
was,
terrible.
like, it was the only thing in that movie that I was like, oh, this does not look good. Everything else looked great, but that just looked horrible.
Did they use Leia and then they just de-age her, or did they just use someone else?
I believe it was her daughter in the dress with her face CGI'd over it, which is also what they did in The Last Jedi.
Oh, really? That was her daughter?
Yeah, her daughter actually plays a role in The Last Jedi as well. She is like a character with lines. I forget the name. But she's also the body double for the flashback when you see Luke and Leia having a lightsaber duel while they're training.
Huh, that's pretty cool. Is it the same daughter that I'm thinking of that was in that movie Why Him with Bryan Cranston a couple of years ago? Maybe it was someone else. I know she has a daughter that's been in a few movies in the last couple of years. That's like an established actress. She was in God, I don't know. A lot of like teen level stuff, but do you know if she has multiple daughters or if she just has one?
Well, I know the one who was in Star Wars was named Billy Lord.
Oh, okay, maybe it's a different daughter then. I'm thinking of someone. Actually, you know what? I'm a complete idiot. I'm thinking of the daughter of it's not Carrie Fisher's daughter. I'm such an idiot. She's the daughter of the woman from Halloween Town. What's her name? She also passed away. Who's Carrie Fisher's mom?
Oh, I forget her
You know who
name.
I'm talking about?
Yeah, and I feel bad because she just died like a few
days after.
Yeah, or before or something. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's not important.
And not important. But what I was going to say was that I'm thinking, okay, so she's her daughter. What I'm thinking of was Leah Thompson. Leah Thompson, who plays Jennifer from the Back to the Future movies, has a daughter that I'm thinking of. This is completely off track, and I didn't get enough sleep last night, so that's probably why I'm going off the hinge here. But going back to Captain America, what I was going to ask you with the CGI for 2011, I thought it looked actually pretty good, to the point where I thought when I first saw it, oh, maybe the muscled up version of Chris Evans is actually the CGI and not the earlier version of him. I had no idea who he was prior to that point, so I thought they did a really good job with that. I think the line, again, this isn't really an isolated thing to just this movie. They bring it back, which is why I'm bringing it up now in the other sequels. Specifically, I think they just bring it up in this one. Don't know about Winter Soldier. You're going to have to correct me if they do. They definitely do in Civil War when he says, I can do this all day. He definitely says it in Civil War. Feel like he says it in Endgame. I think that's a cool little running gag to have throughout these movies with the Captain America character to kind of establish that he's up for a fight and that he's up for anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's his like go-to catchphrase, and the fact that they sort of make fun of it in the Avengers, it's just classic Captain America being the butt of the joke.
Do you think they did justice by the Captain America character by portraying him the way that they did in this movie?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think he was probably portrayed as well as he could have. Like, I can't think of anybody else who they could have gotten who would have done a better job, and I feel like the guy that got to direct this movie, Joe Johnston, was a great choice because he had already he'd already had experience with period pieces doing The Rocketeer, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I was like a huge fan of that as a kid.
Mm-hmm. I thought he did a good job. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So like he's got a good pedigree, and I mean he's also worked with a lot of special effects stuff because he was the guy who did. He did Jumanji, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and I believe one of the Jurassic Parks as well. Like he's got a lot of credibility in Hollywood. So he did a really good job, I think, directing the movie and making it just lighthearted enough to not look like it was mocking World War II.
What about Peggy Carter and the kind of the chemistry that she developed with Steve, with Captain America throughout the movie?
Oh, well, she was great. I mean, Haley Atwell's a great actress, and I felt like that was probably the earliest of the 3 or 4 major MCU relationships, mostly because it was a tragic relationship that they never actually got to have.
Yep.
So, like, the end of the movie, he's telling her, like, you know, sorry, I'm not going to make that dance. And she's sitting there trying to hold back tears. And, like, you know, these two people love each other despite the fact that they've barely ever even, like, held hands or whatever. So the fact that he gets to go back at the end of Endgame and have that relationship and live that life with her is, like, it was just a nice full circle ending from the way this movie ended with that tragic loss.
Oh, absolutely. And I like the fact that the movie didn't end with them, you know, doing the usual stuff. I don't think, like you said, they never even held hands up to that point when he died, or, you know, seemingly died, froze, whatever, at the end of this movie. I doubt he ever said, I love you or anything, right?
No, I think they kissed once, right?
Yeah, I think they just kissed once. Well, she does walk in on him kissing the blonde chick. And that kind of, I love the fact that he doesn't really know a lot about women. So that was another thing I was going to ask you. The whole fonduing thing was one of my favorite parts of the entire movie, where he thinks that it's like a, you know, it's something else, where he thinks that she's having sex with Howard Stark. With Howard Stark, I thought that was great.
Well, and also, you look at Steve before the transformation. He clearly wasn't a ladies' man.
Yeah, not at all, and he says that too.
And then he goes right into the war where he's not getting a lot of action, and then he gets frozen. So, like, by the time Scarlett Johansson is making fun of him in Winter Soldier for probably not having kissed a woman since World War II, it's like, that's probably true. Like, he's just not very successful in that department, despite being a guy who looks like Chris Evans. He just hasn't had time. And
then he makes out with Peggy Carter's granddaughter, right? Not daughter, it was her granddaughter? Niece, okay, niece, in Winter Soldier, which is it opens up a whole other can of worms. That shit is weird in of itself. But no, I thought going back.
Yeah, and that was.
Go ahead.
And that was probably before they knew what the plan with Endgame was.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I mean, that's another one of those things where it's like, yeah, and Princess Leia also kissed Luke before they knew they were brother and sister. Like, it's weird, but it's just part of the movies now, and we have to accept it.
Well, with Star Wars, again, totally unrelated to the MCU, but do you think they knew? I feel, did George Lucas know when he made the movies, like, well ahead of time? Didn't he have a lot of this stuff mapped out, or was that something they threw in for that last movie?
Well, the original plan was he was going to continue making more movies after Return of the Jedi, and the plan was Luke was going to go searching for his sister. And then by the time they started making the third movie, I think George Lucas got so burnt out that he said, I just wrote in that Leia is the sister because she was really the only established female character, and I didn't want to make another trilogy of movies right away.
That sounds like a George Lucas thing to do.
It wasn't the plan. Originally, the plan was like, she was going to be the subject of a love triangle between Han and Luke, and then that sort of went away.
Do you think the directors of this movie, with the way that they ended it, like you said, I know it was a long ways off. This movie came out in 2011. Endgame came out in 2019. Do you think they ever had any aspirations of revisiting that relationship at some point? Because it's not like, oh, I'm sorry I missed the dance. They're actively talking about, like, oh, I'll see you there Saturday night at 8 just to kind of ease the situation. And then that was it. You know, I don't know. It's just kind of crazy. Do you think they had any goals of revisiting that at some point down the road?
I don't know. I mean, it's possible Kevin Feige had something mapped out that early, but I also think that a lot of the Marvel stuff, the reason that it's in phases is because that's how they plan things. So everything from phase 1 was different by phase 3. And, you know, it's just one of those things where the character, the direction of it changed. And that's why the whole thing with the niece was dropped, because that's a carryover from the comics, is him getting in a relationship with the niece.
No, that's from the comics?
Yeah, because in the comics, he doesn't go back in time and live with Peggy Carter.
Yeah.
He's still in modern day, and Peggy Carter's dead or old. So, yeah, that's his love interest in most of the comic storylines. I think he's also had relationships with other characters. Like, I know Black Widow had a relationship with Hawkeye in the comics, and possibly Captain America as well. I don't remember.
Oh, God. Jesus, Black Widow getting around. That's just weird. I mean, they do tease that at many points. They tease her flirting with Iron Man. Again, that's just kind of, we talked about that already in the second movie.
But I think that was spycraft.
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
that was her legitimately.
Yeah, not actually trying to hit on him. Yeah, I think that was the implication. Interesting. So with Peggy Carter and their relationship, I very much agree with what you said earlier, and I totally love what you said that about how of all, like, again, we're rewatching these movies in order here. So with Iron Man, you have Pepper Potts. With Hulk, you have Betty Ross. With Thor, you have Jane Foster. Literally everyone has a love interest or a female counterpart in every single movie up to this point. And this movie's no different. But I think she kind of comes across better than I would argue anyone else. I mean, we already talked about Thor and how great Jane Foster was, how great Natalie Portman was in that role. But in terms of just a strong, independent woman up to this point, and I know it's because she's involved with the military and whatnot, I think she comes across great, and it comes as no surprise that years later they would develop a whole series around Peggy Carter as to what she was up to after Captain America got frozen in the ice.
Yeah, and Agent Carter was good. It definitely has its charm, but I feel like it was canceled early. It only lasted 2 seasons, and I wish it would have lasted longer.
Oh, wow. Do they have any major... I think you've said this before, but do they have any major cameos in that show or no?
Well, yeah, Dominic Cooper plays Howard Stark, just like he did in this Captain America.
Is he a regular character or just a cameo?
I think he's in like 3 or 4 episodes in the first season. I don't know what happened in season 2 with him because I stopped watching partway through when I heard it got canceled.
Oh, that's a good reason to stop watching the show.
But yeah, it had, so you know how Tony's AI Jarvis is based off his butler as a child?
Yep.
So that butler is in Agent Carter.
Oh, really? Wait, is that the same
Jarvis.
guy? It's not the same dude that's in Endgame. That's a different butler?
It is.
Oh, it's the same person?
Same actor.
Oh, wow, that's cool. I didn't know that.
So that was like one of the few times that one of those ABC show characters made it to the movies was Jarvis.
That's cool. I feel like there wasn't, talked about enough probably because many people didn't watch the show that went to go see the movie or in terms of overall people that saw the movie. But that's a pretty cool connection there considering, like you said, they don't really bring many people from the shows over into the movies, it seems like.
No, they're not. And it's a shame, but I understand that they're different entities that have different filming schedules. So trying to make these cameos from the TV shows work might not necessarily gel with the storylines that the TV shows have planned and vice versa. So I get why it's difficult.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It is cool when they are able to pull it off as they did in Endgame with the Butler with Jarvis. But also, going back to Captain America, we had Sebastian Stan as Bucky, as Steve Rogers' best friend, fallen in action, although not really, because we see him as a Winter Soldier in the second movie. We don't really see a whole lot of him. We see him in the very beginning. We see him towards the end when him and Steve are fighting side by side. How do you think he came across in this film?
I'm sorry, who came across?
For Bucky, Sebastian Stan.
Oh, well, Sebastian Stan's a good actor, so I thought he did a good job. And even though I didn't know a ton about the Winter Soldier, I knew that is who Bucky became at some point.
So you know he didn't actually die in this movie, right?
Right. So like when they show him fall off the train, I'm like, oh, well, at least that's a way for them to like explain that he could have survived that fall. And if they decide to bring him back, because then when they announced that the name of Captain America 2 was Captain America the Winter Soldier, it was obvious that that's what they were going with.
Yeah, it wasn't just, he wasn't going to go the way of, the leader or whatever. It was one of the characters that they would tease being brought back down the road, but they never did. You kind of figured at that point, it's like, okay, they're actually going to follow up on this.
Right, exactly. So it's awesome that they got an actor who was willing to sit on the sidelines for a couple of movies and then be brought back as the villain, essentially.
Yeah, no, it's cool that, he wasn't in Avengers. They don't mention him at all. He's not mentioned. Bucky isn't mentioned in Avengers, is he? I don't think so.
Probably
not.
No.
No, yeah.
Unless Cap mentions losing a friend and I forgot the line, no, I don't think he is.
Yeah, no. So it's cool. It's one of those things where they kind of go back to it, and oh, yeah, we'll get to that at some other point, but that's a great movie too. So we also have, not really as a minor character, I knew he was in the movie, but after watching it back recently, he's in it a lot more than I thought he was. Tommy Lee Jones as Chester Phillips. That's a hell of a pickup for this movie.
Yes, and I sort of was hoping that he would have a cameo in Endgame when they went back in time, like maybe an older version of his character, because he doesn't die in this movie, does he?
That's what I was going to ask you. He doesn't die, and they never reference him or show him again, so I thought it would have been cool if they showed him in some, maybe not another movie, because this takes place in the 40s, but Endgame would have been perfect. Maybe he would have been dead by that point, because I don't know how old he is here, but maybe.
Tommy Lee Jones is pretty old to begin with. So,
yeah, no, he's pretty old to begin with.
He easily could have just played an older version of himself.
Yeah, exactly. Did you see Men in Black 3? That came out around this time too?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Jesus.
He looked terrible. He looked really bad. It might have been on purpose, because that was kind of the whole... It probably was on purpose, because that came out a couple months after this, and he looks pretty good here. But in Men in Black, he looked atrocious. But again, I think that was intentional, because he was like, the whole theme of that movie was that he was retiring or whatever. So I get it. But
he's an old man, it's people age.
Yeah, exactly. Shit happens. But I thought he was great in this movie. I thought he came across really well. He played that sergeant role perfectly. And I love that line that he says after Steve walks off and he kind of goes into war and Peggy kind of knows what he's thinking. But you see Chester Phillips over on the side, and he goes, if you have something to say, now's the perfect time to keep it to yourself. Like, how is that not a meme? That's such a great line.
Right, yeah. No, he's a good character in this movie, and, it is a minor role, and getting him was sort of a coup, because they could put the name on the poster, like, hey, this stars Chris Evans and Tommy Lee Jones. Like, he's probably not even the fifth most important character in the movie, but you get an A-list actor, you're gonna advertise it.
Yeah, that, and I like a lot of the little things that they incorporate throughout the movie, from the Red Skull thing, which again, I don't know if that was intentional or not, just kind of something I picked up on the beginning, but when he's fighting that agent after he runs off, kills the doctor, and he uses the car door as the shield, and obviously, as a shield, as the guy shooting at him, and it has a star on it, so obviously planting the seeds for what would become a shield later on in the movie. I thought that was well done. I thought literally seconds after that, when the guy realizes that he's out of bullets, throws the kid into the water, typical movie scene where he has to choose between going after the bad guy or, saving the kid, when we come to find out the kid, he can actually swim. I thought it was one of those cool things where it wasn't a cliche,
Yeah, that was one of those funny moments where, like you said, you expect him to turn around and go for the kid, and the kid's like, I'm fine, go.
He's like, yeah, go get him, I can swim. Yeah, I thought that was funny.
But if I'm not mistaken, the thing with him using a taxi door as a shield is actually, like, directly from a splash page in the comic.
Oh, really? Oh, that's pretty cool.
So there's so many, like, this movie probably references specific shots from the comics more than any of the other early Marvel movies.
Yeah, it would seem so.
And I think that's because Captain America is so important to Marvel's history. Like, he is, in a lot of ways, he is to Marvel what Superman is to DC. Like, Captain America was a very early success for Marvel, and a very important character who also fell out of favor as people started wanting a little bit darker superheroes in, like, the 80s and 90s. Captain America being a goody two-shoes wasn't cool. And now the character sort of had this rejuvenation because of the movies, and like there's crazy storylines in the comics going on with Captain America. Like, there was a whole thing with him being a mole for Hydra.
Oh, I've heard of that before.
Like, yeah, and then they referenced it in the movie a little bit by having him say, "Oh, hey,"
in Endgame, yeah.
But yeah, they're like, the character has had this second life, sort of, because the movies have made him likable again.
That's the cool thing, too, because in today's day and age, with a lot of characters that are goody two-shoes, with goody two-shoes, and again, another wrestling reference, but they just don't get over too well, because that's not really what people want to see. But I think, his portrayal of the character and how, they kind of made him seem and how they made him look and whatever was so good that you just can't help but root for the guy. And I mean, again, just because he's flawless and really doesn't have any drawbacks as a character the same way that Iron Man does, or maybe even Thor as well. People see perfection and they're like, oh, I hate that, or like, I don't want this guy's boring to me. But in many ways, they nailed the character, and I thought they did a great job with it. Again, a few different things I just wanted to address. Zolof's fate. So he's obviously arrested or whatever. They acknowledge in the second movie what happens with him. Did they show him getting arrested? I don't remember. I just watched the back, but I forget. Did they show him getting arrested, or is it just implied that he was, held captive?
Because Tommy Lee Jones interrogates him and eats a steak in front of him.
Oh, right. Yeah, so that happens. But what I'm saying is that's the last time that we see him, right?
I believe so, and then they talk about his mind being uploaded to a computer during
Winter Soldier. Yeah.
Winter Soldier, and there was I don't know if it's a deleted scene or something they planned, but I guess in the comics his mind ends up in some super robot and he becomes a villain. And there was I don't know if they actually shot it and animated it, but there was supposed to be a scene where when all the missiles come and blow up that place and Steve and Natasha have to, save themselves, you actually see him running out of there in a robot.
Really?
And I think they just were like, you know what, let's just cut that. It's too weird.
That is a little weird. I think it would have been a little weird for this movie, so I'm glad they kind of left it open-ended. It was just a weird thing because they interrogate him, but you don't see him after that. You would think that maybe Red Skull goes back after him and tries to kill him like they did Sitwell in Winter Soldier, but that's just it. And thankfully that wasn't the end of the character, because we would see him again in Winter Soldier and they would explain what happened there. But I
believe he may have actually been an Agent Carter, now that I think about it, because they brought a lot of characters, including the Howling Commandos from the first movie, into that show.
Because wasn't he working with S.H.I.E.L.D. after this?
Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't a thing during World War II. Her and Howard Stark are sort of responsible for it being formed.
Okay. So, yeah, I was confused because I could have sworn, obviously, Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., but was that because of him, or was he just kind of along for the ride? Did he start that process?
I don't think he was part of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I believe Hydra was in existence long before S.H.I.E.L.D. was, so when S.H.I.E.L.D. became a thing, Hydra was already positioned to be like, okay, well, let's put a few people in there.
Gotcha. Well, that would make sense. The Tesseract is another big part of the movie. Obviously, that's what fuels the weapons that Red Skull wants. Do you think that they did a good job with the Tesseract? It would seem like at this point it was one of those random things that Marvel says, hey, we kind of need you to plant the seed for our upcoming movie because we're going to use this in Avengers and build towards this whole Infinity Stone thing. No one really knew, casual moviegoers that is, really knew what the Infinity Stones were. What were your thoughts on the importance of the Tesseract in this movie as it would relate to future films?
Well, I liked it as a MacGuffin just because, it's one of those easy to explain, it's just an all-powerful thing from space. But I don't even know if at this point it was planned that there would be an Infinity Stone inside it, because that's not what happens, in the comics. In the comics, the Tesseract is its own totally separate thing from the Infinity Stones.
I think the timing of it was perfect because it was the centerpiece of the Avengers movie, which is the very next one after this, which we'll talk about for our next podcast. But that's what that whole movie would be focused on and whatnot. Again, no one really knew about the whole Infinity Stone thing. Did they have no Infinity? I think this is the first Infinity Stone technically they introduced in the MCU, right? Because I don't think there are any in any of the other movies up to this point, correct?
Well, Loki's staff always has an Infinity Stone in it.
Well,
the staff he was given, but that was in the Avengers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So this might be actually the first one.
Yeah, I think this was the first Infinity Stone. Yeah.
Did you think the way that
Although,
or go ahead.
Technically, they show the fake gauntlet in the first Thor movie. You see it in the background.
Was that the same fake gauntlet they showed in Ragnarok too? Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's why they showed her knocking it over and declaring it as fake, because they put it in there as an Easter egg, not knowing that they were going to do the whole Infinity Gauntlet storyline.
Oh,
and so
gotcha.
when it came time to that, they're like, well, we're just gonna say that it was fake and that it was one of those things that Odin put in there as a sign of power, but he doesn't have the real one.
Gotcha. Well, attention to detail. Got to appreciate it. So with the Tesseract...
Yeah, well, otherwise they're leaving plot holes open.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few other plot holes, like, I mean, we'll get to it, but like at the end of Age of Ultron, when they show him saying, hey, I'll do this myself, Thanos, that is, with the gauntlet, and then they don't show him, or they don't show it anyway, but they reference it being created years later in Infinity War. I think they actually had to come out recently, because they never made it clear in the movies. That never made any sense to me. I think it was actually made clear recently by one of the directors that in that movie at the end of Age of Ultron, that was actually a practice gauntlet for what he wanted to be made by the dwarfs or whatever in Infinity War. I don't know if that's legit or not, or if they were just looking for a reason to explain it, but at least they attempted to fill that plot hole, you know?
Well, and what's weird is, like, they never really tell you how long he's had that gauntlet in Infinity War. Like, when Thor goes to that planet and talks to the dwarf guy, like, you have no idea how long it's been since that attack took place.
True, but what I always thought was, if it had been like 4 or 5 years, you would think that Asgard probably would have noticed by then, right? Because they would always watch over the dwarf planet?
I mean, you'd hope so, but at the same time, like, Thor even mentions that the 9 realms were in upheaval and he had to go around trying to fix problems. Like, it's possible that that news just never got to them somehow. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't really matter when the gauntlet was made, but yeah, Marvel has a lot of inconsistencies if you look at every movie as one long storyline. Like, there's like a huge one in Spider-Man when the thing is like 8 years later, and it's like, well, no, it's not 8 years later. We know what the timeline is.
I know, yeah, that was bizarre, because they do a great job for the most part of acknowledging movies and when they come out, saying, oh, you know, this happened a year ago, and the whole the snap kind of messed all that you know, that I assume that's going to be done away with going forward, because now it's like 2023 in the movies. But yeah, no, that is a good point. They never really made enough sense to me when that came out, and I'm glad I wasn't the only one that noticed that, because that didn't make... When you do the math, it's like, well, it's 2017 when the movie comes out, so how is it 8 years ago? Is that 2010? Like, very bizarre.
Yeah, and I know that they play fast and loose with the timeline, like, oh, well, this movie, even though it came out 2 years later, is actually only 3 months after the first one. Like, the first 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies are only supposed to take place a couple months apart from each other, even though it's several years between when they were made.
Which makes sense. I mean, just because they don't interact with the rest of the MCU, right?
But then that's weird, because it's like, so what you're saying is it's a 5-year period between Guardians 2 and then when we see them next in Avengers? Like, that's weird.
What were they doing that entire time? Is that what the third movie is going to go into? Like, yeah, that is weird.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. All I know is that the Guardians will be in the next Thor movie.
Oh, is that confirmed?
Yes, and I believe that has to do with the fact that it's going to be a while before James Gunn can get around to making Guardians 3 because of Suicide Squad 2.
Yeah, I think they can't start with it until, like, next year, right?
Right, so Disney's like, well, we might as well keep these actors working, so let's put them in Thor, and then it makes sense because Thor went off with the Guardians at the end of Avengers, so why wouldn't you have them still together? Like, that's good.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad they're continuing with that. I would assume, again, completely off topic from Captain America, but I think my guess is that the movie that would have been coming out right now, even if the pandemic wasn't happening, instead of Black Widow, probably, in my opinion, would have been Guardians 3. And maybe it would have come out later on in 2020, but it seems like the movies are following a 3-year pattern, and Black Widow is the first movie right after Endgame, or I'm sorry, after Far From Home, seems incredibly random. I think the whole James Gunn thing happened 2 years ago in 2018, so I mean, they hadn't started the movie at that point, but I assume that's when it would have started to get the movie out for now, and now it's just delayed by several years because they didn't bring him back onto the project until like a year ago, and then the whole, you know, like you said, the whole Suicide Squad thing happened, so it probably worked out for the better, because I would be very unhappy. I mean, it sucks that we're not getting Black Widow, but I would be even more frustrated if Guardians was supposed to be out right now and we weren't getting it due to this whole thing.
Yeah, but I also think it maybe worked out for the best because Suicide Squad 1 was not great.
No,
And
it sucked.
I
Yeah.
think James Gunn can kind of right the wrongs. Like, they're sort of treating it not as a sequel, almost as like a semi-reboot,
Yep.
even though some of the actors will be the same. It's very strange.
Yeah, it's very odd. They have some of the same actors. I think they're calling it The Suicide Squad, right? It's not even Suicide Squad 2.
Yeah, something like that. All I know is that I'm looking forward to seeing how John Cena does in one of these big budget comic book movies.
I was just about to say, yeah, Cena is on tap for the movie. Very interested to see how he's portrayed. I want to see Cena in the MCU. I know that's not the MCU, but I want to see John Cena in the MCU. I want to see The Rock in the MCU. I know he's black. He's Black Adam, and they have his own movie coming out at some point. But I think that'd be sick. But anyway, what I was going to say earlier before we got off track with all the other stuff was that with the Tesseract, were you a fan of how they kind of? It was weird. I mean, the final shot of the movie before what we see at the end when he wakes up and whatever is that the Tesseract falls through the ship, just disappears, and then they show another shot of it later, like in the water, which obviously means that we're going to see it again, which we do in Avengers. But they also show Red Skull just getting consumed by the thing. And obviously they brought him back in Infinity War. But when you were watching this, were you like, okay, that's it? Like, they didn't even have Captain America beat him. He just got consumed by the Tesseract, and that's the last time that we see him for years and years and years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Marvel movie, so they have to, like, find slightly gross ways of getting rid of people without being too violent.
Sure.
So having him get like vaporized was the easiest solution. I mean, Captain America still wins the battle. Like, he is the one who is responsible for Red Skull failing.
Yeah, no, and he saves everyone, drives the ship into the ice, blah, blah, blah. So he is still the hero in the end, and he does thwart Red Skull's plan. It just kind of felt like a weird, ending to his character, although it wasn't. I think the directors have come out and said that they actually had plans at that point to use him at some point. They didn't know when, but I think they left it open-ended in case they wanted to use the Red Skull character again, right?
Yeah, that was probably the intention, because I believe Red Skull is one of those characters that like keeps finding ways to come back in the comics, so who knows what the plan is now, because the guy who they have doing him now is actually, I don't know if you know, it's an actor from The Walking Dead. His name is Ross Marquand.
Who does he play in The Walking Dead?
That's who did Red Skull. What's that?
Do you know who he plays in The Walking Dead?
I can't remember the character's name. He's the one who like brings them to Alexandria in the beginning. He's one of the few gay characters. Like, he lives with his partner in Alexandria.
Oh, okay. I mean, he's not one of the major people, is he?
I mean, he kind of is for a season or two. Aaron, that's his name, Aaron.
Okay. The name sounds familiar. I've seen a bunch of the episodes. I think I watched a lot of season 1. My brother used to be really into it, so I'd have to go back and watch it. But yeah, I remember. I don't remember him from Walking Dead, but I do remember seeing him behind the scenes for Infinity War. But yeah, it was a different actor though. Did they ever explain why they didn't bring him back, the same actor for this movie? For Infinity War? Did he just not want to do it?
I think it was Hugo Weaving's choice. She's just didn't want to.
I wonder why. I wonder if it's one of those things where, like, I don't know. It's just one of those weird things. I remember
maybe he was busy at the time. I mean,
maybe you would never know.
He was in all those Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies. He was probably just really tired of all these big budget things and was like, I just want to take a break.
Maybe, or just didn't want to come on for like a 2-second cameo in a movie where he didn't really matter. I mean, it was cool to see the character, but I don't blame him. But
I'm kind of curious if he's going to show up in this Matrix movie they're making.
Is he part of the Matrix, the original Matrix movies?
Yeah.
I did not. I have not seen those movies.
Guy in the first one. He's Agent Smith.
I did not know that. I have not. I don't think I've ever seen that Matrix in full before. I know I have to.
Yeah, the Matrix. They're doing a sequel all these years later, and it's really weird because supposedly Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss are coming back, and they're both dead. So I don't know what's happening in this movie, but I would love it if they found a way to get Hugo Weaving to come back, even as a different character.
I would have to watch. What is this? The 4th one they're going to be coming out with?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think the. When is it? I think they're coming out with John Wick 4 around the same time as The Matrix 4, right? Or no?
Originally, if I'm not mistaken, they
Was it
were
the same
originally
day?
scheduled to be released like the same weekend.
Yeah.
But now, obviously, everything is different. I don't even know if they've started filming either of them yet. I think John Wick was like in production when all this stuff happened, so who knows? But at this point, it feels like it'll probably be a while before we see that Matrix movie because it'll be very visual effects heavy, just like the other ones.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to check those out. But as we wind down here with our review of Captain
You
America...
only need to watch the first one.
Don't need to watch the first one?
No, you only need to watch the first Matrix. The other two are terrible movies.
I definitely have seen... I know the whole concept of, like, the red pill thing and whatever. I know a little bit about it, but I don't think I've ever sat down and watched the whole movie from start to finish.
I mean, the first Matrix is it's a classic action movie that totally changed the way American action movies are made. And then the Wachowskis got so up their own asses with the mythology of the Matrix universe that the second and third movie just became unbearable.
Oh, really? Well, hopefully they redeem themselves with the fourth movie. And that was due out next year, you said, originally?
I'm not sure when it was originally scheduled to be released. I just know that like that and John Wick at some point had the same release date, but I'm pretty sure none of that's the case anymore.
Yeah, probably not. I did see John Wick 3. I thought it was a great movie, so I think the fourth one is going to be good too. But yeah, so I think that was about it. I had everything else, like he had talked about. I don't remember him saying this in the movie, but he said that he can't get drunk because his metabolism is like 4 times faster than the normal human being. I completely forgot about that. I thought that was cool. How he does everything for not just America, but how he does everything for Bucky, Peggy, the Doctor. Like, he has a lot of driving forces in the movie, which I like a lot. The evolution of the suit, going from what he was wearing on stage, that crappy suit, to an actual suit by the end of the movie. And the evolution of said suit throughout the next 3 movies is also very well done. And, yeah, I mean, I think that was about it. I think they just did a really, really good job with the character. I thought the cliffhanger at the end, when they're like, oh, you're actually in present day, and they set the stage for the Avengers movie, which came out right after this, was also amazing. So any thoughts on that before we wind down here?
Yeah, I mean, Captain America is a great movie, and, phase 1 of the MCU, I think, in 15 or 20 years, when people are looking back at all this, people will look at phase 1 a little more positively than I think a lot of people do now.
No, definitely. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do this, was to go back and rewatch phase 1 and really, appreciate it for what it was. I forgot to mention this, or forgot to ask you this. Do you think, or what were your thoughts actually, on when they basically aired a teaser trailer for the Avengers at the very end of this movie? It wasn't like a scene. I mean, it was a scene from the upcoming movie with the boxing thing when Fury went up to Captain America, but they actually showed a full-length teaser for Avengers at the end of this movie. What were your thoughts on that if you saw it?
Yeah, I saw it. It was definitely cool. I mean, by the point that this movie came out, they'd already announced and started filming the Avengers, so it was just cool to see. It was just cool to see all this stuff coming together, because I think for people like me who grew up watching mostly the cartoons and then occasionally reading comics, seeing all these characters in live action was something that didn't really seem possible without it being a cheesy movie.
Yeah, that's
because like the Tim Burton Batman movies, I love them, but they're cheesy as hell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so are the Joel Schumacher ones that followed that everybody hates, with Val Kilmer and George Clooney.
Yeah.
But like, even the first X-Men movie, like, even though it's pretty good, you can go back and see that it's like, at that point they were still not fully sure how to make superheroes live action cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was, the leather suits and stuff like that. But I feel like right around this time with the phase 1 of Marvel is when they really started looking at these movies and going like, these comic book characters can be for adults too.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I came into this movie not really sure what to expect. When I saw it for the first time, not really knowing much about Marvel or the MCU, kind of expecting it to be a cheesy movie. It's Captain America. Like, how good can it actually be? But they really turned it into an awesome movie. And the best part about it is that as good of a movie as this is, I think it's actually the weakest of the three Captain America movies. Winter Soldier is even better, and I think Civil War might be the best of them all. I'm pretty partial to Winter Soldier. We'll talk about that at some point. But would you agree that this is actually the weakest of the three movies that have come out with Captain America?
I think it's hard to judge this one against the other two because you're talking about a period piece in World War II versus two modern movies that have much bigger budgets and much bigger casts.
Sure.
But I don't know, like, the more times I've watched Civil War, the more I've started to consider it like one of the average MCU movies. Like, it throws a lot at you, but it doesn't really accomplish very much.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this Captain America movie was a great action movie, but it was also just well acted and well written and just very high quality storytelling, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That, in addition to the fact that, as you said earlier, just a great period piece, makes it well worth watching. We'll get your thoughts on Civil War as we move along here. Next episode, we're talking about the Avengers. I've been waiting to watch this one for a while, just because this movie is one of my favorites in the MCU, that being the first Avengers from May of 2012. So until then, Chris, people can find you on the Twitter machine, BR_Doctor, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, this has been awesome. I know we just recorded this episode right after the Thor episode for anyone, watching the two episodes, separately of each other. So I've been on the phone with you for almost 2 hours now. I very much appreciate your time, dude. Looking forward to the next one. This is always great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good, man. Have a good one. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.